Streaming is a fantastic fallback for any interview that we do with any industry exec in Music Week. If things are getting a bit quiet or a little bit tame, we just bring it up and everyone seems to have an opinion on it. In terms of streaming going mainstream, for all that to happen, obviously all the different elements of the value chain of the business need to get behind it, which is something that clearly isn't happening, particularly with certain high-profile examples at the moment. So if you look at labels, Daniel Ek from Spotify just the other week before the Grammys said that Spotify delivered $200 million in revenue to the rights holders so far in its lifetime. Yet on the flip side of that, the labels will take a risk with something like Beyond Oblivion's Boink, which was a service which promised some real meaty revenues to come their way, ended up collapsing famously and owing its creditors, which included some of the labels, somewhere between $100 million and $500 million. Obviously, some elements of the labels are still convinced that the streaming services cannibalise traditional record sales, which is where the vast majority of their revenue comes from. Others have an opposing point of view. And as we are at the moment, just to really set the scene of streaming's importance, it's still just 3% of the market, according to, of the recorded music revenue market in the UK, according to the latest BPI figures. But subscription, that's subscription revenues. They hit 24 million in 2011, and that was up 47% year on year. So it's still a small chunk of the revenues created, but it's really escalating at a serious rate. Then if you look at another level of business, managers and artists, probably the most famously outspoken element of the business about streaming services as it stands. They're looking at elements including the scale. Famously, you know, people use the example that you will get a lot more money for a play on a decent-sized radio station than you will a streaming service. People on the opposing side and people that work for the streaming businesses, I'm sure we'll hear tonight, will say that it's just a case of scale. At the minute, Spotify, 3 million paid-for subscriptions. Witnessed a Spotify spokesperson say the other week that they're already looking at the 100 million mark of subscribers, which would obviously change the game completely for artists and managers. And there's also a bit of cloak and dagger going on with the deals with the labels and the streaming services themselves. There's not a lot of transparency exactly between the amount of money that gets to the labels and that trickles down to the managers and the artists. Then, of course, finally, there's the consumers and sort of what the uptake will be amongst them and how much they're willing to pay. There is obviously the argument that the consumers are coming away from piracy and peer-to-peer sites to use streaming instead, which is great. But there's also an element of confusion amongst the consumer base. There's a lot of services and a lot of services cropping up every day. In fact, my senior staff writer Tom's not here, because I think he's actually taking a look at a yet-to-be-announced digital service right as we speak. So every week we hear about these new services that promise to change the game. But even if we just look at some of the major players, from We7 to Spotify, obviously Deezer, Rara.com, Rdio, Napster, Google, there simply isn't the space in the market for all of these to survive for a long period of time, and some dominant players will eventually come out, but some will surely fall by the wayside. Just a final figure to sort of sum up the situation globally. According to the latest IFPI stats, the monetized audience of subscription music services worldwide shot up 65% in the last year to 13.4 million. But really, if we're talking about streaming going mainstream, we need to hit somewhere near 10 times that, which may be helped actually by the influx of brands, which is just one point that I want to make sure that we cover tonight. In the latest issue of Music Week, we did a quick roundup of the ABCs with traditional music magazine publishers, so all the way from NME to Q, etc. And all of them, without fail, were falling over themselves to mention the opportunities that Spotify's app arrangement and other services might offer them in the future. So it's not just about music, very, very possibly. But for the streaming music globally to hit 10 times 13.4 million, which would be somewhere, you know, where we could say it was reasonably mainstream, even for early adopters and for serious music fans, a number of things need to take place, which I'm going to let some very clever people talk about now. Cheers, Keith.
Thanks very much, Tim.